Alright, so in this video I'm going to talk very quickly about some of the finer points of handling a weapon and some of the mistakes you'll probably run into when you first start practicing. So what are the objectives when handling a sword? Firstly, we don't want to get cramp in our hand. We want to make sure we're handling it in a nice and efficient way. We don't want to get tired for the same reason. And thirdly, we don't want to do any damage to our wrist. And one of the first mistakes you're going to make is reaching around the sword too far and holding too tightly. Naturally, holding too tight, that's going to put a lot of strain on your wrist and eventually turn into cramp, but also it forces you to make these tilts of the wrist to adjust the angle of the blade. And although with something light you won't notice it, as soon as you start moving up to axes, maces, or even staffs and spears, these type of motions can put a ton of strain on the wrist and eventually damage it, especially if you're training or fighting for a prolonged amount of time. Second thing that people do is they open and close their hand, and although it seems quite minor, what that does is it runs the risk of the weapon flying out of your hand if it gets wet, if your hand's sweaty, or even if the blade is just a particular shape that allows it to slide out of your hand. So yeah, get rid of that. And the last mistake people make is they hyperextend, so they break the wrist, some people call it. So they tilt further than they need to, or tilt back further than they need to. Again, putting tons of strain on the wrist that's unnecessary. So how do we get around this? So what we do in Shasta video is we tend to use the fingers quite a lot to make adjustments, and also the body to do twisting motions and stuff. First one we'll look at is turning the blade this way. Normally you'll do that, but what we do is we line up the edge of the blade with the middle joints from the fingers, and that allows you to adjust the blade without tilting the wrist, if you can see, yeah? And important thing to note, these two middle fingers, although I can let go of these ones, I'll never let go of these two. Even when I extend and open out, I always make sure these two are locked on. Second one, tilting the blade forward and back and hyperextending. How we get around this, we put a slight bit of pressure on the blade with the thumb, and then you pull down with the little finger and push up with the index finger to move the blade. This pressure on the thumb is highly important because it creates almost like a pivot point, which makes the blade move in a really predictable and controlled manner. If you keep relaxing this thumb and opening the hand, the blade can move about or jiggle about, and although it doesn't make a difference when you're doing something slow, in full motion and with heavy weapons, that just puts, again, unnecessary strain on the wrist. Lastly is twisting, like this. So instead of starting the twist from the wrist, what I'm going to do is push up with the thumb. That does a lot of the work for me and just makes it a lot easier on my wrist. On the other side, I push up with the index finger or the knuckle of the index finger and do this. So these two motions together. And now there's two exercises that should help you eliminate the most common problems that you'll face, and it's just figure of eights on either side. So first one is like this, and what people normally do is they come here, then they'll bend the wrist here and come back. Fine with something light, not so fine with something heavy. What we do instead is we come here, create the pivot point with the thumb, tighten with the little finger, and then we twist the wrist, yeah, and just allow the blade to fall, and then we come back. When you do come to here, we're not going to tilt the wrist any further than, say, holding a water pistol or a gun or something. There's no need to go this far. We're literally just going to twist until the index finger is sort of in line with the forearm. So yeah, so practice that a few times. When you get comfortable, instead of twisting with the wrist or letting the blade fall with the wrist, you're going to start doing it with the elbow. So you come here, and the elbow does it. Now you start doing the shoulder, again taking pressure off the wrist, like this, then the shoulder blade, and then eventually the blade stays still, the fingers do most of the work, and you allow your body to do a lot of the motion, yeah? And this just really takes a lot of the pressure off your wrist. Second one is going this way, and again what people normally do, come here, hyperextend, bend the wrist and come back. What we do, come to here, allow the blade to fall, use the index finger to pull it back up. Boom, boom, boom. Once you're comfortable with that, use the elbow to take some stress off the wrist. then the shoulder, then the shoulder blade, then eventually hold the blade still and just allow your fingers and your body to do most of the work. All right, hope that helps.